Up next, we have Calle. He is the maintainer of the Cashu protocol. If you haven't played with Cashu yet, I highly recommend. It's really, really interesting, a really, really cool tool. And his chat, financial privacy as a human rights issue. So everybody, please give a warm round of applause to Calle.
Thanks, man. One, two. Test, test, test. Does this work? Nice. Does this work? Nice. Okay. Hey, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm Calle. I'm from the internet. I work for Bitcoin. And today I want to give a slightly different talk than my usual talks. My usual talks are very technical talks, but today I want to focus on historical account of the crypto wars and where we are today in terms of financial privacy and what we can learn from history. So in 2012, an angry father runs into a Target and wants to talk to the manager because he's extremely upset that his teenage daughter received baby products from the Target advertisement system. And he is so angry that he tells the manager, "What do you think you're doing? Are you trying to get my teenage daughter pregnant? What is this?" And the manager doesn't know what to answer. And the angry father returns back home and goes back to his family and has this discussion on the dinner table where the daughter admits that yes, she was pregnant, but she wasn't ready yet to tell it to her family. But the Target algorithm was so smart that she, when she browsed through the store and bought some typical items for pregnant women, that the algorithm determined her to be pregnant and sent her coupons for her pregnancy. Now, this is a famous story that it is hard to confirm the story, whether this really happened or not, we don't know. But we're sure that there are many of such stories happening every day, all day, on the internet today. So I'll start with the Article 12 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It says, "No one shall be subject to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence." In the 1940s, this meant that governments were not able to open your mail or just walk into your home. But in the 21st century, this must include also your digital rights on the internet and financial activity. And we'll see why. So let's take one step back first and ask, why is privacy important? For centuries, we've defended our privacy through physical means. We have booths, we have whispers, we have curtains that we can close whenever we need. And in fact, our democratic societies, they depend on privacy. So our entire voting system builds on the preface that we can cast our vote privately and cannot be coerced to vote for one candidate or the other, and keep our vote private after the fact as well. So we cannot be coerced or made and be paid, for example, for a certain vote that we made. But privacy is not only a good for itself, it is a gateway to so many other rights that we enjoy. It guarantees our dignity, autonomy, and ultimately democracy itself. So I'll give a brief historical story about one of the worst violations of privacy in history that I can think of, that led to the worst amount of suffering, which is in the Second World War, when the Nazis invaded the Netherlands, they were able to deport 75% of the Jewish population in the Netherlands. And when you compare it to their invasion of France, in France they were only able to deport 20% of the population, the Jewish population there. So the difference between those two invasions is explained by the fact that the Dutch government held meticulous lists of all the religious affiliations of their population in a centralized database. So when the Nazis invaded the country, it was very easy to single out the population that they wanted to harm. So it should be clear that a free society today depends on privacy in the digital space as well. So, how do we defend digital privacy? We say cypherpunks write code. What does it mean? The story starts with the crypto wars 1.0, and the fact that I call it 1.0 should give you also a hint towards what's coming next. In the 1970s, the US government started to sanction encryption as a weapons technology. So they made it illegal to export encryption, and I think many of us know the famous T-shirt by Adam Back, for example, where he printed the algorithms on a T-shirt. Or they were also printing algorithms into books because you could export books because they were protected under the First Amendment of free speech. And in that historical context, the cypherpunk movement was created. So there is a very famous cypherpunk manifesto by Hughes who says, privacy is the power to selectively reveal oneself. And whether you liked it or not, in those times, if you were a cryptographer or developer, you were an activist. Your tools were political speech. So the lesson that we learn, and the lesson that we also, that these people already understood back then, is that we must defend our own privacy, and we cannot hope that governments and institutions or corporations will do it for us. And we must do it with technology. The Crypto Wars 1.0, historically speaking, conclude with an epic ruling in 1995 between Bernstein, a cryptographer, and the Department of Justice, where the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that code is indeed speech, and that the export of code cannot be regulated like arms technology, and it must be treated under the First Amendment. So although, in a legal sense, the crypto wars were won with this ruling, the fight continued, and you could even say just started. So in the 1990s, the FBI decided that we should implant a piece of hardware into all communication devices called the Clipper chip that is meant as a backdoor to read your messages and share it with the good guys before you send it to your loved ones. This reminds us of new policies that are being enacted and enforced today, namely chat control that is currently being discussed in Europe and that needs strong opposition from our sides. And in 2013, we've learned that the good guys aren't maybe the good guys after all. Snowden revealed the biggest leak in info security of history, where he was able to show that the United States was engaging in all-encompassing surveillance of the entire population of the planet Earth, every single message that you write on the internet. And the story continues. So 2016 was a pivotal year where we had two very major events. First, the battle between Apple and again the FBI, where the FBI was trying to coerce Apple to open up their iPhones because they wanted to hack into it because of terrorism. And Apple said no, and they won the case. Side note on that, the FBI never needed Apple's permission for it. They already had a crack, they just wanted the precedent. And in the same year, WhatsApp flips the switch and turns on end-to-end encryption for over 1 billion people. In the history of cryptography, probably the most significant event in terms of numbers. And look here. In 2020, suddenly the EU Commission instructs their staff to use Signal. Wow, things have changed, haven't they? So the narrative has flipped. Privacy suddenly became the best practices for the most senior and official places. And the reason this happened is not only because of the technology that was developed. The technology is there. But mainly because the narrative has been pushed by ordinary people, by activists, by educators, who fought for decades and decades to move the discourse from one side to the other. So I wonder, how did we move from here to here? In the Bitcoin space, we are well aware of the fact that half of every transaction is a monetary transaction. Money is everywhere. It's part of your speech, your identity, and your social map. So how is it speech? Imagine you make a donation to a political party or a movement, you want to support a protest, or you buy a book that has some political message inside. So the things that you spend money on express your speech in a political and societal sense. And indeed, the US Supreme Court agrees again. They have also ruled that spending money is speech and therefore must be protected under the First Amendment. Money is also identity. Your transactions reveal your most important markers, your political preferences, your medical conditions, your religious affiliations, your social affiliations. And I also define your social map. So your money reveals where you have coffee, it reveals where you go to therapy, it reveals with whom you go to cinema. Spending money does not only reveal information about yourself, but it also reveals information about your surroundings and the people who interact with you. So ask yourself, what do your last 10 transactions reveal about you in this very moment? I mean, we're on a Bitcoin conferences, and hopefully your 10 last transactions were actually Bitcoin payments, so they don't reveal much. But if you also use your credit card in the last couple of days, it might reveal that you're in Riga, but might also reveal that there's a bunch of other people who also swiped their credit card for the first time in Riga. So maybe there's a Bitcoin conference going on. So let's see what happens when dictatorships and also democracies can limit the way you can use your money. And this is a very important topic for us in the Bitcoin space. We can start with Chinese social credit score system, which the regime in China uses to control their population and especially their political expression. In 2019, during the Hong Kong protests, the Chinese government cracked down really hard on the protesters, closing their bank accounts, putting people into jail. And those people coming out of jail around these times, but since they have been burned once in their past, many of them will never be able to get a bank account ever again in their life. And this is what they're facing today. But it's not only the Chinese communist authoritarian regime that does this. It's also the free democracies in the West that punish political dissent using financial oppression. So we all know the story from WikiLeaks in 2010, where PayPal and Visa blocked the donations to the service. We know the famous quote by Satoshi, who said someone kicked a hornet's nest, and then Satoshi chose to leave. But also the Canadian protest in 2022, where a legal protest was punished by the democratic government, and these people's bank accounts were frozen, and they still suffered the same issues years later. Another crazy event that almost happened is PayPal 2022, in this whole political environment of misinformation, in quotes, decided that they would fine their users for spreading misinformation online and just take money from your PayPal account to punish you for some arbitrary thing that they invented in their head, that this is something to be worth punishing. They retracted that, I must say. So obviously even the CEO thought that this was a stupid idea. And lastly, we need to mention CBDCs, because everything that we've seen so far is built on the old financial system, so to speak. But CBDCs will enable this kind of oppression and financial punishments on a global scale. And I think when we mention CBDCs, we must also mention stablecoins in the same breath. They're basically the same thing, just two sides of the same coin. So where we are right now. Today, we're fighting the crypto wars 2.0, and it affects us directly. It's not only the cryptographers that try to build private messaging anymore. And namely, we have two very important events that happen in our space, which is the Tornado Cash trial and the Samourai Wallet trials. So in 2022, the OFAC sanctions code for the first time. Unprecedented event. And just a couple of days ago, Roman Storm has pled guilty for MSB charges although the entire operation that he had was a non-custodial form of financial software. 2024, the Samourai developers are indicted, and they also accepted a plea deal a couple of weeks ago with the courts, accepting money service business transmission charges against them. Again, a non-custodial tool that is being classified in a way that was not predictable. The message that they want to send here is very clear. If you work on privacy software, then they will come and hunt you. And this all happens in a backdrop where academic studies show over and over and over again that the vast majority of crypto payments are fully legitimate transactions, and especially compared to fiat payments, are more legitimate than not. So these actions, they are not only to attack these projects, they want to paint privacy software in a light that makes the use of privacy software suspicious by default. Hal Finney famously said, "The computer can be used as a tool to liberate and protect people rather than to control them." So how do we do that? First, we need to shift the narrative, and this is, I think, the most important lesson that we have from the Crypto Wars 1.0. We need to reframe the debate. And here I want to mention the work of the HRF that is really doing an immense job at pushing this narrative forward. And importantly, we need to highlight the need for financial privacy in a perspective of human rights and democracy. So examples of that are, for example, in Nigeria 2020, where a feminist movement was blocked from financial access from their regime, and they switched over to Bitcoin in order to operate their fight and continue fighting their fight. Or in Belarus 21, where the criminal regime of Belarus sanctioned journalists and put them into jail and cracked down their entire operations, and they required crypto and Bitcoin to function and criticize their government regime. And we also need to personalize the issue. This is how people work. This is how people build intuition. We need to tell stories of individuals that are relatable, so that your mom, your grandma, your friends can actually relate to the stories. It's not only a technical story, it is a human story that we need to tell. And we need to strengthen the coalitions between devs and NGOs and journalists so we can all pressure policymakers together. Developers working on their own on solutions is not enough. The technology alone will not solve the issue. We need to build coalitions and groups and work on this together. And finally, we need to advocate for tools that already exist. We need to tell people why Bitcoin is important and how they can use Lightning so they can make small transactions, and how to use Cashu so they can use custodial systems that respect their privacy, or messengers like Signal or White Noise or Tor, such that these become more prevalent in society and spread in use. So I'm going to end with a quote by Phil Zimmermann, the inventor of PGP, end-to-end encrypted email. And he said this in 1991. If privacy is outlawed, only outlaws will have privacy. This quote is so old that many of the people in this conference were not even alive when it was said. So this fight has been going on for decades at this point, and there is still so much to do. Thank you for your attention.